Well, it all starts with my parents. You guys see all the highlights. What is it about me that you guys don't know? As I sit up here and I watch all the other recipients stand up here and they give their history and...
Michael Jordan is 62, and by every measure, he should be living the most comfortable chapter of his life. Instead, people close to him say this period has been marked by struggles that trace back to moments most fans never knew the full truth about. Moments that reshaped him, haunted him, and still affect the way he lives today. We're talking about hidden pressures, painful losses, and a level of loneliness that doesn't match the life of a billionaire icon. The real story of what's happening to Jordan now isn't just surprising. It's heartbreaking in a way most people never imagined. The murder that changed everything. July of 1993 was supposed to be a golden moment in Michael Jordan's life. He had just led the Chicago Bulls to their third straight championship. At 30 years old, he wasn't just the best player in the NBA, he was the most recognizable athlete on the planet. He looked untouchable. And then, life delivered something he could never have prepared for. His father, James Jordan Sr., was driving through North Carolina when he pulled over on the highway to rest inside his red Lexus SC400, a car Michael had given him. That simple decision cost him his life. Two teenagers, Daniel Green and Larry Demery, came across the car and attempted to rob him. In the process, they shot him. James disappeared for 11 days before his body was found in a swamp and identified through dental records. For Michael, this wasn't just the loss of a parent. James had been the steady presence in his life long before fame arrived. His advisor, his biggest supporter, the person who grounded him. He was courtside for almost every major game. He celebrated every trophy, every championship, every milestone. Their relationship wasn't performative or distant. It was real and deeply rooted. At the funeral service held at Rockfish AME Church, around 200 people gathered. But the focus was on Michael, this towering figure who suddenly looked small in his grief. He broke down repeatedly during the service. His assistant pastor, Johnny Williams, would later talk about how vulnerable Michael was that day. The public didn't often see him like that. He was always the fierce competitor, always composed, always in control. But that day, he struggled to even stand as he spoke about what his father had taught him and how those lessons would stay with him. And then came the part that made everything harder. The conspiracy theories. Some reporters and commentators, still obsessed with Michael's gambling habits, began suggesting that the murder was tied to debts or revenge. It was all speculation, cruel and unfounded, but the damage was done. Michael later talked about how painful it was to hear people build narratives around his worst moment. He said he couldn't understand how anyone could look at his grief and choose to make it worse. He also shared something striking. He never wanted to know the motive behind the murder. Knowing why wouldn't change the outcome. His father was gone. No explanation could make it easier. That loss came at a moment when Michael was already tired. The pressure, the attention, the constant scrutiny, it had all piled up. And so, on October 6, 1993, he stood at a press conference and told the world he was retiring. He was only 30, healthy, dominating the league, and walking away. People jumped straight into theories. Hidden suspensions, secret punishments. Some insisted the NBA forced him out. But the reality was much simpler. He was empty. Basketball didn't feel like home anymore because the person who always sat in the stands cheering wasn't there. In the Last Dance documentary, he made it clear. His father's death was the main reason he stopped playing. Baseball became his escape, in part because it was the sport his father loved and had quietly hoped he'd pursue. The gambling controversy that haunted him. Before anyone can fully understand the tragedy surrounding Michael Jordan's father, it helps to look at what was happening in the months leading up to it. Because 1992 and 1993 weren't just championship years, they were a period when Michael's private habits, especially his competitive streak with gambling, burst into public view in a way he never expected. People closest to Michael have always said the same thing. He didn't just enjoy competing, he needed it. It didn't matter if it was basketball, golf, cards, or something as silly as rock, paper, scissors. He turned everything into a test of focus and nerve. Winning wasn't just fun for him, it was how he stayed sharp. But that mindset got him into trouble. In 1992, a $57,000 check with Michael's signature showed up in the middle of a federal court case. The check belonged to James "Slim" Buhler, a man who was later found guilty of laundering money for substance traffickers. Michael initially explained the payment one way, then had to clarify in court that it was actually to settle gambling losses from a weekend of golf and poker. The public didn't care about the details. They cared that Michael Jordan's name had appeared in a federal investigation at all. Then, just months before the 1993 playoffs, a businessman named Richard Esquinas came forward with a book claiming Michael owed him more than $1 million from golf bets. Michael argued that the number was exaggerated, but he later acknowledged settling the debt for a few $100,000. That story alone was enough to damage his spotless image. The idea that the biggest star in basketball could lose that kind of money off the court fascinated people, and not in a good way. Tension built even more during the Eastern Conference Finals against the New York Knicks. The night before Game 2, Michael was seen at a casino in Atlantic City. Reporters made it sound like he was risking his entire career. The Bulls lost the game, and his poor shooting in Game 3 only fueled the fire. Suddenly, a single night out was being connected to his performance, his mindset, his priorities. It became the focus of every press conference, and the noise just kept growing. Behind the scenes, the NBA decided to investigate. Commissioner David Stern hired a former federal judge to determine whether Michael had bet on NBA games or violated league rules. That investigation hung over him for months. Michael tried to explain that his gambling wasn't about addiction, it was about his competitive personality. He also admitted privately that whenever his gambling caused bad press, he would write his wife, Juanita, a check as a gesture of apology for the embarrassment. But the public didn't soften. The stories kept coming, and so did the scrutiny. At the same time, whispers in the tabloids claimed he was living a lifestyle that put stress on his marriage. Private investigators described seeing him in compromising situations with women during road trips. Whether the rumors were true or not, they were relentless. And in the background of all this noise stood his father, James, who always defended his son. He urged reporters to give Michael space, reminding them that he was still human, despite his fame. Then James was murdered, and suddenly, everything shifted. The gambling stories, the casino sightings, the rumors, none of them compared to the grief Michael now carried. But in the cruelest twist, some people connected the tragedy to his gambling controversies, suggesting a link between the murder and Michael's debts. It was a theory with no foundation, but it spread anyway, and that made an unbearable loss even more painful. 2 days after Michael announced his surprise retirement in October 1993, the NBA formally closed its gambling investigation. He was cleared of wrongdoing, but the questions never entirely went away. And as Michael's life kept unfolding, another part of his story began to unravel, one that had nothing to do with basketball or betting. The marriage that cost him everything. Michael Jordan's first marriage to Juanita started the way a lot of real-world love stories begin, quietly and without any of the glamour people assume comes with fame. They met in 1985 at a Bennigan's restaurant after one of his Bulls games. Nothing dramatic, Just two people crossing paths at the right time. 4 years later, they ended up at the Little White Chapel in Las Vegas getting married, long before celebrity weddings turned into events with sponsorships and press coverage. By then, they had already welcomed their first son, Jeffrey, though the relationship hadn't always been smooth in the beginning. Michael initially questioned paternity, which created real tension. But they eventually worked through it and built what appeared to be a solid family. From the outside, they looked stable, even enviable. Over 17 years, Juanita raised their 3 children, Jeffrey, Marcus, and Jasmine, while managing the household, navigating Chicago's attention-heavy sports scene, and dealing with the pressure that came with being married to one of the most recognizable people in the world. She had to juggle Michael's fame, the constant spotlight, and a lifestyle that revolved around his demanding schedule. And while the public only saw the polished moments, family photos, charity events, courtside appearances, there was a much heavier reality behind the scenes. For 4 years, Juanita hired private investigators to follow Michael around the country. They tracked his movements in Chicago, in Florida, and in several other cities. Their reports consistently detailed him spending time with multiple women, at least half a dozen, all documented through confirmed sightings and dates. These weren't rumors floating around tabloids. They were actual findings from professionals she paid to gather the truth. And eventually, the truth weighed too much for the marriage to carry. In 2002, Juanita filed for divorce, calling the marriage irreparable. Then she tried to give it another chance, stepping back from the paperwork and choosing to continue. That decision bought them 4 more years, but the cracks didn't disappear. By 2005, they were living apart. In December 2006, after nearly 2 decades together, they finalized their divorce. The financial outcome made global headlines. The settlement totaled $168 million. At the time, the most expensive divorce settlement in sports history. Juanita also received their massive 25,000 square foot Highland Park home. Michael had no prenup when they married, and although a post-nuptial agreement was eventually signed, it didn't shield him from the financial blow. His legal team later admitted that the outcome heavily favored Juanita, far beyond what state law might have required. But beyond the dollars and property, the emotional impact was deep. Their 3 children were teenagers at the time, Jeffrey around 18, Marcus 16, and Jasmine 14. They had to navigate the shift in their family structure while the entire world watched. All 3 have spoken over the years about growing up in a competitive environment shaped by their father's intensity. But none have publicly discussed in detail what the divorce felt like while it unfolded. When Juanita eventually opened up in a 2013 interview, she wasn't bitter. She talked about wanting a simpler life, one that revolved around her kids and her own peace of mind. She mentioned learning new ways to communicate and making sure the children were supported during the transition. Michael, meanwhile, moved forward. In 2008, he met Yvette Prieto in Miami. After 5 years of dating, they married in 2013 in a lavish Palm Beach ceremony reportedly costing around $10 million. This time, Michael protected himself with a strict prenuptial agreement. He had lived through the consequences of entering marriage without one. Still, the cost of his first marriage went beyond financial loss. It revealed a private reality that had always existed behind his polished public image. That even the most celebrated athlete of his generation struggled with personal decisions that had lasting consequences. It exposed how far the gap could be between greatness on the court and the complexities at home. And for Michael, that wasn't the end of the weight he carried. His children soon inherited their own burdens, simply because of who their father is. The burden passed to his children. Being one of Michael Jordan's children is nothing like the public imagines. Yes, there's money, privilege, and access to rooms most people will never even glimpse. But that comes with something heavier: the pressure of carrying a last name that represents near impossible standards. Back in 2009, during Michael's Hall of Fame induction, he turned to his three oldest children, Jeffrey, Marcus, and Jasmine, and acknowledged something they'd all felt privately for years. He told them they were carrying a weight he himself would never want placed on his shoulders. And he wasn't wrong. Jeffrey, the oldest, tried to follow the obvious path first. He walked on at the University of Illinois in 2007. From the moment he stepped onto the court, the comparisons began. Every shot, every defensive mistake, every stat line was measured against the greatest basketball player ever. Jeffrey pushed through for a few seasons, then stepped away, came back, and eventually transferred to the University of Central Florida to play alongside his younger brother, Marcus. Marcus faced the same expectations, even though he arguably had more natural basketball talent. It still didn't matter. Their effort was constantly overshadowed by what people believed Michael would have done in the same situations. Both brothers left the sport before finishing their college careers. They've spoken over the years about how exhausting it was to compete not just against opponents, but against a myth. Some of their childhood moments make the pressure even easier to understand. Marcus once revealed that their father used to stage intense tackle football games with them on their knees in his bedroom. During one of these games, Jeffrey dove for an imaginary touchdown, and Michael tackled him so hard that he crashed into a glass table. The impact was brutal enough that Marcus thought his brother was seriously hurt. That competitive instinct, the one that made Michael Jordan a global icon, didn't turn off just because he was playing with his kids. Marcus's adult life hasn't been easy either. In February 2025, he was arrested in Florida on charges that included substance possession, resisting arrest, and driving under the influence. Legal filings later revealed he'd been dealing with substance issues for some time. 6 months later, he announced publicly that he was sober and rebuilding his life. It was a rare moment of openness, but it also raised questions about what kind of internal pressure he's been carrying all these years. His relationship with Larsa Pippen, the former wife of Scottie Pippen, added another complicated layer. Their relationship was highly public, often criticized, and reportedly not approved by Michael. It ended in early 2024, but not before placing another spotlight on Marcus that he never seemed comfortable under. Jasmine chose a different route entirely. She avoided basketball and moved into sports management, working with both the Jordan brand and the Charlotte Hornets. She has been the most private of the three, though she once admitted that she didn't fully understand her father's fame until she searched his name online as a child and suddenly realized why everyone reacted to him the way they did. All three children have had to carve out identities separate from the legend they were born into. And while they've built lives of their own, the shadow of their father's legacy follows them everywhere. What that legacy means for Michael, especially now in his early 60s, is a much heavier story than most people realize. The loneliness of being the greatest. At 62 years old, Michael Jordan is living a life most people can only dream about. He's in his Florida mansion, surrounded by comfort, surrounded by wealth that's reached into the billions. He's married to Yvette Prieto, raising twin daughters, and showing up occasionally on NBC as a special contributor for their NBA coverage. On paper, everything looks perfect. But that first NBC interview with Mike Tirico revealed something quieter underneath the surface. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was just honest, in a way people aren't used to hearing from him. Michael shared that he hasn't picked up a basketball in years. The last real shot he took was during the Ryder Cup, when the owner of the house he was renting asked him to shoot a free throw for his grandkids. He said it made him nervous, genuinely nervous, because those kids had grown up hearing stories about him as if he were a myth. Their expectations were frozen in time, back when he was still performing the impossible on command. and he hadn't touched a basketball in years. It's strange when you think about it. The greatest player in history hesitant about taking one shot. But that's the thing about being Michael Jordan. There's no such thing as a casual moment. Even a free throw in someone's backyard becomes a referendum on his legacy. He also talked about wishing he could still play, not in a nostalgic way, but in a way that made it clear the desire is still alive. He said he wishes he could snap his fingers, pull on his shorts, lace up his shoes, and get back out there. Because that's who he still feels like. Someone who competes. Someone who rises to a challenge. Someone whose identity is tied to pushing himself. But his body can't do what his mind still wants. For most of his life, basketball came before everything. He has admitted that he was selfish with his time, his energy, and his attention. He built an empire on being singularly focused. But that kind of focus doesn't leave much room for anything else. And even now, long after he retired, remnants of that lifestyle follow him. His competitive nature isolated him from a lot of people. Teammates have said he was intense to a fault, pushing everyone to the breaking point. He turned tiny slights into fuel. He constructed pressure in places where none existed. It won championships, but it didn't create many lasting friendships. Even today, his relationship with Scottie Pippen remains strained, long after The Last Dance reopened old wounds. And that brings us to the heart of it. Michael Jordan has everything: the money, the legacy, the respect. Yet there's a loneliness woven through his story that's hard to ignore. He spends more time now with his young daughters, trying to be present in ways he wasn't before. But you can still hear it in the way he talks about the game. He misses it. He misses who he was in it. And he misses the part of himself that still believes he could step back on the court and prove something all over again. Before you go, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Michael Jordan's story surprised you the most? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe and check out the next video that just popped up on your screen. There's a lot more to discover.